If you are watching this video, it is because you, like me, love Halloween Horror Nights. I've been going to the event since 2005 and I've loved every scary minute of it. The Orlando event has been running for over 33 years now, and there have been over 200 haunted houses at HHN. And for as many horrifying, memorable, intense haunted houses that Universal has created, there have also been some stinkers. In this video, I want to share with you guys what I think are some of the worst Halloween Horror Nights haunted houses in the past few years. I want to try and focus on houses that are a little bit more recent and ones that I've personally experienced for myself. There will also be an honorable mention for some older houses that, while I never got to see, are known for being unpopular. Before I start cutting into this video though, I need to stress that when I talk about bad HHN houses, I am never talking about characters. Those performers are the blood and soul of the event, and without them, every house would be a bad house. I'm digging more into the concept, design, and execution of a haunted house. And some of these haunted houses that I would consider bad are still ones that I've gone through and have gotten scared by the wonderful performers inside them. So if any characters are watching, know that I love and respect what you do, and please don't come for me and pop out of my closet in the middle of the night. So, the first house we're going to talk about is from 2023, the year of Dr. Oddfellow, and you probably know which house I'm going to talk about because in a year of mostly good houses, one stood out, and not in a good way. I am of course talking about Chucky Ultimate Kill Count, located in the Fast and Furious queue, which isn't a great spot for a house already. I've never really loved any of the houses they've built in there. I just don't think it lends itself to a good spot for a haunted house. It always feels cramped. They have to do that awkward in-between where you step outside to get into the next part of the house. But I do think that this year's Major Suites house has done a really great job with this area and is easily the best of the houses built there so far. But let's talk about Chucky. I actually love intellectual property houses at Universal. It's really amazing to see what their creative team comes up with and how they represent the movies and franchises in a haunted house. And more often than not, they do a really great job paying respect to these classic horror movies that often have years of movies behind them. What I don't like with IP at Universal is when they do what I call a mandate IP house. Sometimes there's just houses that feel like they built it to promote a new movie or a show. The plot of Ultimate Kill Count was that you were going to a Chucky haunted house dedicated to him, but he didn't feel like it was being taken seriously, so he took over and is killing everybody inside. The house had some references to previous Child's Play movies, but was mostly a way to promote the Chucky show on Peacock, which I don't think anyone I know watched. You'd go through the haunted house and there would be these random TVs all around that would just be showing clips from the Chucky show on repeat. They were in every room and Chucky was narrating you around the house, but you couldn't even hear it because there was so much going on and it was so loud. The house also felt kind of cheap, with a lot of flat scenery. The performers were just wearing regular clothes, and then there was a bunch of static Chucky dolls scattered throughout the house. There were some actual Chucky puppets in the house though, including a really cool one right at the start of the house that looked like it was from the movies. Overall, this house is a concept that I think failed because A, corporate mandate to base it off the most current version of Chucky, even though I think visitors are more familiar with his earlier movies like Child's Play and Bride of Chucky, and B, the house location. Compare this to the Hollywood version of the same house in the same year, which was so much better. It had tons of Chucky puppets, actual animatronics, much better use of TV screens, and a gigantic Chucky that would come out at you. It was clear that Orlando's HHN had no intention of f***ing with the Chuck.
Don't f*** with the Chuck!
Now we're jumping to 2022 for our next house, and this year is kind of a special year, because in my opinion, this had two of the worst HHN houses in recent years. The first was Hell Block Horror. This had a pretty simple story. You were in a monster prison, and they all broke out. Who put them there? We'll never know. What you see with this house is what you get. A bunch of stone prison hallways with alien writing and tons of monsters popping out at you. Which is fine for any other haunted house that isn't a Halloween Horror Nights house. It was a very generic house, and if you're a fan of the event, it was really easy to see that all the monsters in the house were reused costumes from previous years. And maybe that was the point of it, but it didn't really feel like a callback on purpose. Just kind of felt a little lazy. This house was also so loud, like right from the start, it was just blasting noise at you. I'm pretty sure this house was louder than any other house this year, and I feel bad for the performers who had to be in there 8 hours a night. Now, I do want to give some sympathy points to Hell Block Horror because the big rumor swirling around this house was that originally it was going to be Evil Dead Rise, but because of some unknown issues with the IP, most likely the movie not being released until 2023, they had to scrap the house and build Hell Block Horror last minute. This is not the first time there have been rumors about last-minute house changes. Allegedly, the Purge house from 2015 was originally going to be a Scream house, but they had to change it to the Purge because conflicts with the IP, where Universal wanted to make it based off the original movies, but the IP wanted it to be based off the current MTV show. I think ultimately they did best with what they could in the situation that they were in. But if I had to choose between going back through Hell Block Horror again or Ol' Smokey at Hellgate Prison, strap me in. Now the second, you probably guessed, was Spirits of the Coven, which was right next door to Hell Block Horror, and this has to be the most boring Halloween Horror Nights house I have ever done. Which is a real shame too, because when they first announced this concept, I was really excited for it. 1920s, speakeasy witches, what's not to love? But the problem with this house wasn't the concept or the design, the costumes, the sets. It was actually a beautiful house, and all the characters in the house looked so cool. They had really great costumes. But there was a very important ingredient that was missing in this HHN house, and it was sound. Sound is so incredibly integral to the HHN experience. There are haunted houses from Horror Nights past that I can remember just by audio cues in the house. And one of those is on this list, actually.
That's my goal!
And Spirits of the Coven, when it first premiered, had like no audio cues. No one popping out at you would say anything. I think the only actor cue was, "What's the password?" Which I don't think was triggered by anyone. It just kind of like went off on its own. And there were long stretches throughout the house where nothing would happen. Hallways with no performers. And this wasn't a staffing issue or anything like that. There just wasn't anything there. Mix that with the silence of this house, and you ended up with a house that felt like it went on forever, and not in a good way. Eventually, towards the end of the run, they actually changed some things in the haunted house and gave performers audio cues with dialogue, which helped. But at this point in the game, the Spirits of the Coven haunted house had already gained a reputation for being one of the weakest houses of 2022. For this next house, we're jumping not so far back in time to 2021 and visiting a little town called Cary, Ohio. Welcome to Scarey. Horror in the Heartland was located in a tent next to Men in Black, and this was sort of a mashup tribute house to a lot of the original haunted houses over the years that took place in a fictional/real town called Cary. If you were a Horror Nights mega fan, you'd recognize a lot of the callbacks and scenes that played out throughout the maze, but for the more casual fans and general public, this house was too deep of a cut. If you didn't know what the scenes were from, you ended up with a super random, disjointed mishmash of scary rooms where you went from sewer zombies to vampires to ghosts to creepy school kids, a movie studio, a butcher shop, and eventually prison? Yeah, a little all over the place. And look, there's nothing wrong with fan service, especially with HHN. This event has been going on for 33 years now, and there are people who have been here since the beginning, and those folks absolutely deserve to be catered to. But on the flip side, the event has become so popular with casual visitors who are just starting their HHN journey that referencing Hellgate Prison, a house from 2004, doesn't really mean anything to them. The location also isn't great for a haunted house. It was very small, and the house felt super short, especially compared to the previous house that was there in 2019, House of a Thousand Corpses. Also, kind of random, but 2024's Triplets of Terror house for some reason doesn't take place in Cary, Ohio, but actually in another Ohio town called Toledo, which is also a real place as well. So maybe they're dropping the Cary stuff? Anyway, next time you're driving through Ohio, I'd recommend skipping either of these small towns. Now, something that makes Halloween Horror Nights really special is the fact that the event changes every year. You're always going to see something different when you visit the event next year, and because of that, whenever Universal decides to repeat a haunted house, it never does well as the original. American Werewolf in London was a smash hit in 2013, and didn't get the same love when they repeated it in 2015. I would know because I actually worked it. And the same goes for what is probably the longest running IP at the event, The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead had count them, 5 haunted houses over the course of its tenure at Universal, even going so far as to have a year where every scare zone was themed to the show. And honestly, I had a hard time pinning down which of the houses I was going to talk about specifically because all of the Walking Dead mazes sort of blend together. But if I had to pick one, it would be 2015's The Walking Dead, The Living and the Dead. This was the 4th version of a Walking Dead haunted house at the event, and at this point I think fans had agreed that the franchise overstayed its welcome. The first one was new and exciting. It was a really big deal to have The Walking Dead at the event. The second one was okay. The third house at least had the uniqueness of being the biggest house they had ever built with the most amount of characters at the time. And the 4th house was the 4th house, okay? There wasn't really anything special about this house. It was incredibly generic, and it was based off season 5 of the show, which is about the time that regular viewers were checking out anyway. Like seriously, I barely remember anything from this house other than the fact that it was in the parade building in the back of the park, and that's about it. It featured the slow, shambling zombies the series is known for, but none of the characters, which always annoyed me for such a character-driven show. You'd never see Rick or Daryl popping out at you. It was just the locations from the show, and your Walking Dead zombies, which were just like your standard Halloween zombie. Is the Walking Dead show still going on? I don't even know. All I know is that I hope the Walking Dead stays dead at Halloween Horror Nights. Alright, I've got one more house that I need to talk about before we go into some honorable mentions, but before I do, I've got a question for you. Does the word meat mean anything to you?
Meat!
If it does, you know that I'm talking about Roanoke, Cannibal Colony from 2014. This was a house based off real history. In 1585, there was a group of settlers in Roanoke, Virginia that went missing, and no one had ever figured out why. But here at Horror Nights, they became cannibals and ate each other. This house was in the parade building, and from what I remember, it was kind of annoying. All the performers were bloody colonists, and they'd all come out at you and they'd say the same thing: meat! The sets were also super basic. I remember just like a bunch of wood fences and hallways with rope sif. That's stuff and face. This was a gory house, lots of dead bodies, but that's all it really had going for it. It was like a less interesting version of the recent Blood Moon Dark Offerings haunted house. I also remember the finale not being super exciting. The Wendigo monsters that possessed the village were just stilt walkers wearing horns. Overall, this house was pretty lame. I gotta give it some points though, because it would always be a walk-on and I got to go through it a lot because of that. So now we head into the honorable mentions for worst HHN houses, and these are on the list because I never got to experience them, but all of the old message boards and wikis that I would scroll through to get all the info for this video, they mention these houses a lot. One of the ones that was mentioned the most was actually Afterlife Death's Vengeance, which was a non-comedy 3D house. You don't get many of those, where you watch the execution of Bobby the Blade Gillette and entered this like weird fluorescent version of hell. People thought the house had a weird layout, and the 3D effects didn't really work for this one, making it one of the all-time worst. I've also got to bring up The People Under the Stairs Under Construction, a house from 2006. What you're seeing right now is a picture of the actual facade to this haunted house, if you believe it or not. In this house, you had to wear a helmet with a light on as you went through a construction site and got attacked by Gimp Daddies. And this honorable mention is one I do remember. It was Creatures from 2008. This was a silly house. You were in a backwoods redneck town that was being attacked by aliens. I remember a lot of shotguns pointed at you in this house in these like big alien suits that were super cheesy and not scary at all. They were so big, they had trouble fitting through the doors in that haunted house. And the last one I've got to bring up is from 2002, all the way back when HHN was in Islands of Adventure. It's Fear Factor. That's right, Fear Factor was actually a haunted house, and each of the rooms were based off people's phobias. They had a room of darkness, they had a room full of stuffed fish, and they had a room with bugs. And back then in 2002, they would use real cockroaches in this haunted house. This house is one of the first houses in HHN's history that might be universally disliked. And that, my friends, is all I've got for the worst houses of HHN. With over 200 haunted houses over 33 years, it was kind of difficult to try and pick the worst of the worst, because I haven't seen them all. So I want to toss it over to you guys. What are some of the worst Halloween Horror Nights haunted houses that you've experienced? Please leave a comment down below, I'd love to hear them. Until then, thank you guys for watching another Vincent Vision, and I'll see you in the fog. Watch out.